it confirms my suspicion about the new technology, that's all.
Sure.
Anyway, we I don't know when we got cut off, but yeah, I think we were talking about the
so you were mentioning about the
growth of Islamic psychology, which comes from a need, which I think relates to the growing numbers of complex problems that comes from, or in a sense of dissociation that comes from living in a non-fitry way. And so there's more of a demand for Islamic psychology that is able to sort of at least have a model of understanding how we should be and how we should be in relation to our fitra.
Yes, mashallah. You mentioned there were a lot of people in who were helping you do that. So I imagine it was a concerted effort from.
Well, I think certainly yes. You need. I mean, Malik was fortunate. He was a very good Islamic scholar in his own right. Spoke fluent Arabic. Most of us aren't. So we rely on good scholars. But most scholars wouldn't have an idea about psychology. I mean, this is another problem. You've got a lot of papers written by people who are simply trained in Islamic sciences, which don't really have much reality to them in terms of practice. So you've got to quiz a scholar in a way. You've got to, or they say something and you understand this makes sense of something you're finding in clinical practice. So it slowly, bit by bit, you're developing. But also, there's a huge benefit in meeting with other people that are dealing with the same issues. And that's what's happened since the 70s, 80s, is that more and more of us have come together. We have our team in Bradford now, about 14 people in it, but there are other teams around the country. We bring in people, we mentioned Rabia, but the scholars like Samir Tajani and others, Shanawaz, and lots of people we pick up on the way, that we bring into the courses because they know a lot and they're good teachers. But other people we're meeting with, so we get a huge benefit from working in teams. And it's through that, different people's insights, different people's experiences, different people's knowledge, that the field grows.
So as a practice or a form of practice, would you say it's effective more so than Western models?
Much effective, because in a sense, even the NHS, because I was a Jungian, I was able to practice in much the same way as I do now. I hope to have grown as the years have gone by. And it's easier in a way working with Muslims because you're able to use the common language much more easily. But what we call Islamic psychology is really universal. It's for everybody. Everybody's made the same way. You might need to change vocabulary. So, in a sense, Islamic psychology is culturally suitable for Muslims because we're using a vocabulary everybody shares. But the essential model is universal. And an indication of the efficacy is that with our service in Ihsan, we daren't advertise. I mean, we're a charging service. We charge as little as possible, but we've been completely unsuccessful in getting any Muslim bodies to support us in any substantial way, that is. So we have to charge. But despite that, we daren't advertise. We have a waiting list just from word of mouth. So people come, they've been, hopefully receive benefit. They've gone away and told people, or somebody else says, I've got a problem, say, well, I was well treated by Ihsan. Recently, we did have a qualitative study done by somebody at Bradford University, and that was interesting. As we expected, I think everybody, with ex-patients, everybody said they benefited, but more than half that were interviewed had also been to standard Western therapies. A few said they benefited from that, but not as much as what they got from the Islamic Psychology Service at Ihsan. But also quite a number said they felt they were, I think, slightly damaged by the standard Western therapy they've been to before. So we know it's effective, and we know that very often what's provided in the mainstream is sometimes effective. I think a lot depends on the personal qualities of the therapist, but sometimes isn't, and sometimes is damaging. So you do have to always be cautious about going for therapy, I think.
Well, see, you know, the Islamic model for Muslims, do you find that to be more effective, or
with Muslims?
Yeah,
it can certainly be effective with non-Muslims. I think, I mean, my experience would be it's more likely to be successful with a Muslim because people already have the vocabulary. You know, people may not say Al-Ghazali or whatever, but you know, people have an idea of what you know, the Nafs Amara is, or the and nafs actually is a term that can get very confusing because, as you probably know, nafs is always used as qualification. Its essential means like a vital spark, I suppose. You've also got to qualify, and people often get mixed up in the different uses of the term nafs. But if we people do have a sense there is an energy within the self, and a sense of a heart, and so on. So it's easier normally to work with a Muslim. But also, a lot of the problems we see in Muslims comes from an inappropriate understanding of Islam. So either because culture gets mixed up with religion, or there's a view of fiqh that might well have been appropriate in one situation at one time, in one culture, but is no longer now, or for that particular person. And so people get into a conflict between their sense of fitrah, you know, which is guiding to what's right for them, and what they understand to be Islam. So, you know, we can get sometimes more problems in the Muslim community, but they're also, again, you'd need to have that understanding and either reasonable knowledge of fiqh yourself, and certainly scholars you can go to that don't just have a good formal knowledge, but also have a hikmah, have a wisdom in how they use that knowledge, and an understanding of the human condition, so they can relate the religious ruling to that person's situation and be a force.
Yeah, and consolidate. Yeah, and consolidate what you're doing as a practitioner. So, Sidi, one of the reasons why you established Islamic psychology is because, you know, psychotherapy has traditionally been, you know, quite restricted in its dealing with Muslims, and it wasn't really accommodating of religion and spirituality. They're generally the common theme of people who comment on psychotherapy. They're the two things that they mention. So, in what way would you say Islamic psychology is broad and more suited for Muslims as a psychological form of therapy?
I really would get away from the concept that we've just got a culturally adapted therapy in Islamic psychology. We've developed something from an Islamic basis. It has a relationship with certain things that have developed in the West. It is rather different from that which is developed in the Eastern religions. It can be very close to what could be developed in Christianity, which I don't think it really has done, but partly because Aquinas, one of the major figures in Christian theology, learned a lot from Al-Ghazali and other Islamic scholars, so we get the same way of thinking about the self in Aquinas. So it is for everybody. There is I think Muslims are more aware of the fact that what they sometimes get from standard therapy doesn't fit. So thus there is a particular need for a service that can culturally address Muslims with problems, I suppose.
And have Muslims been receptive to that? Those who have received the treatment, or
very, yeah. As I said, we have, even though we're charging, and people can get a free service on the NHS in this country. We then advertise. We have a way as it is.
Mashallah.
So, alhamdulillah,
that's good to hear.
You always learn from your clients. That's the other thing.
Allah give you further success, inshallah. So when you open it up, there'll be a lot of people. So Sidi, you have, mashallah, over 40 years of experience dealing with people who are suffering from psychological illnesses and problems. In your opinion, what are the main causes for psychological issues in the male contingent of the Muslim community?
Well, of course, there's all sorts of factors that affect mental health, including physical factors and biological factors. So, but if we're dealing with things that are predominantly psychological, at least, there is the thing which is for everybody about living out of fitra. And the more you do this, the more stress you're putting on yourself. And you get an accumulation of these things, and then people are unable to cope. It's not one simple thing. And I mean, a very basic problem is that people in the Muslim community are marrying later and later. The sunnah is to marry early, quickly, and easily. And the sunnah isn't a joke. If these things are given for our benefit, puberty is getting earlier and earlier. So this places strains on people. I'm not saying everybody's going to go do lally because they're not married early, but I mean it's one of those factors. You've got too much short attention span, intellectual activity. This was particularly strong during COVID. So it's about really living a balanced lifestyle. We need the akal. But if you're constantly on the computer screen, particularly doing sort of minor things with it, you're exciting part of the brain, but you're not really achieving wisdom. And it's about balance. So if you're not also going off and playing cricket or riding a horse or, doing, of course, the acts of ibadat and so on, you get unbalanced. And then the worst thing is mufti Google. So, you're playing on the computer, you get thoughts in your head, about, am I praying the right way, or am I homosexual, or whatever it is. You then type in the question. And actually, that scholars should be, I think, face-to-face with somebody. I mean, unless you ask a very basic question, like, should I eat pork or shouldn't I? Almost everything else needs to be tailored to the individual and their circumstances. So you get back some sort of simplistic reply, and sometimes it's, all my beard's not short enough, or it's too long, or and it's a factor leading to the explosion of OCD, obsessional compulsive neurosis, which we've seen a lot of, particularly in more so in men than in women. That's men are more inclined to lead unnatural lives. And the other thing, distressingly, is the amount of homosexual abuse of children in the Muslim community. I'm not saying it is greater than the other community, but it exists. And we see quite a lot of those cases, mostly as children. So it's the general not living in a fitri lifestyle. A particular aspect of that is too much celebration, I don't want to say, a sort of using the akal, but not in a particularly balanced way. Too much time indoors, too much time on the computer, and then sort of getting obsessional doubts about things.
Celia, I think this might be interesting to you. You probably already know, but I think it was in one of the readings when that we were given in Cambridge Muslim College, where Dr. Rabia Malik, I think it was one of hers, and she wrote in there something interesting in regards to psychological illnesses. And she said that the modern psychological illnesses, that she used the word complex. So she said throughout history, you might have had one psychological illness, and you might have had depression, for example.
Yeah.
But she said what's happened in the last 10 to 15 years is you've got, a compound of psychological illnesses. So you might have depression alongside schizophrenia, or you might have and so on and so forth. And she used the word complex. So if you just enlighten us further on that, I found that really interesting. That it's not simple. It's actually, even in the form of illness, it's complex.
No, Robbie had written that actually, but it's exactly what I'm finding. So problems are getting more and more layered, complex, multiple. They were, and at every level, and it applies also to the more serious mental illnesses. They're complex, layered. You can't diagnose them as easily as I could have done 30 years ago. And the volume. When my first qualified job, there were 3 psychologists dealing with an entire London borough, including a large mental hospital, including children work. And we managed. I have no idea how many psychologists and then psychotherapists, because only psychologists did the therapy then, really. Psychologists, psychotherapists, CBT therapists. The numbers exploding and the waiting lists are still getting longer. So,
what would you say are the main, or what are the main causes of that? Would you say it's social media, just the modern world we live in? What would you?
I think one thing actually increases evil eye. If you think evil eye simply being a gaze upon you, which is coming, not from a good source, even if it's a sort of a flattering gaze. And I see people putting their dinners on, their phones showing it around. Well, what if somebody enters that dinner? So it's one of the fact we haven't, we also bring this into Islamic psychology. We do accept there are occult influences. Not, I think, nearly as significant as people think they are, but you do need to discuss it. And you do need to say occasionally, yes, it can be a factor. So that's just one of them. People don't put on social media so much, I feel miserable today, it's really hard. It's look at this lovely dinner I'm having, or look at me basking in the sun in, wherever it is. And then there's a sort of social pressure to be in a particular way. But it's also about the short attention spans that are developing from it. I twice stood for Parliament, and the first time we were told that, and this was 1997, I think, we weren't to make any statement longer than about 2 minutes or something, 3 minutes, because people had worked out the average attention span was no longer than that. So no point making a long speech. You've got to get everything into 2.5 minutes. By 2001, it was down to like 1.5 minutes. I suspect now it's about 15 seconds. And yet you look back in the past, Gladstone, the 19th century Prime Minister, in a famous campaign, was talking to open-air audiences of 20,000 plus outside Glasgow, without microphones then, talking for 5 hours, and his sentence structure was so complicated you can't understand it now. So people had, and this was working class Glaswegians, but people had an attention span greater than an hour. It's just one of the psychological changes. Does it make a difference to mental health? Probably, but it's just one amongst many factors. And then
I think it's Bismillah.
Well, not living according to fitra in all sorts of ways. Late marriage being one, but it's not the only factor. I personally find a strain using the computer, and I feel it draining. So I use it as minimally. I assume if I'm feeding it, it must be having that effect on probably everybody to some degree. You can be inured to it. And if you've got to do a job that's involved on the computer today, you've got to do it. But it has an effect. People are working longer hours, and the basic things like we're not walking to work or riding a horse. We're not going to bed at dusk. We've got electric lights. yeah, so many things going on in society. I'm sure becoming global, I think.
Yeah, I think that's probably the main paradigm or the main trend really is the complexity of modernity, and the manner in which we live our lives from where we grow up, and how much usage we have of technological devices, our phones.
Yeah.
And then you read about how much technology actually goes into like the user face of these things, and the like button, and all of these different things on Facebook, and it's literally just feeding you and just making sure that you're constantly attentive to it. It's harder to get off. It's then there's the addiction side to that, and those trends are there also. But not only that, it's as you said, it's creating a society really where you're putting your best image out there. So in all of these things are really tasking on the mind. And again, I'll make reference to Dr. Rabia Malik, and then inshallah I'll give it back to you, where she was asked, I can't remember what the question was, but it was in relation to mental health. And she said that one of the main trends, I think you touched upon this as well, is shame in the community, and social pressures. And these are, some of the reasons why, because we're trying to live up to someone else's expectation, and it's always trying to reach that. And in the process of that, you end up breaking yourself.
Yes, and so it's another factor. So there it is. I mean, one of the therapies we use, we encourage people to do the sort of sports, because there are all sorts of deep benefits, particularly archery and riding, swimming. And it does help people sort of get back into a bodily balanced state. You can't do archery or horse riding if you're bent. So your spine gets aligned, a lot of muscles are being used. We know there's a connection between muscle tension and trauma. But it just brings everything into better balance. And I think cricket is not a bad substitute for archery. It involves some of the same sort of skills. And can people go gardening and just walking in nature and looking at trees and having a good diet. We use a Hakim as part of the service. A lot of imbalances are caused by eating the wrong diet. So, the human beings are very complicated. That's why you need a very comprehensive way of diagnosis, where you're including the body and including the soul, the qalb. You're looking at the akal, you're looking at all the subtleties that are within the huwa nafs, the energies that we have in the body. So, yeah, alhamdulillah, I think we're always learning. But I think we probably have a better service than almost anybody else. I mean, not at Ihsan in Bradford, but the other services around the country. And well, you've mentioned Rabia Malik. Rabia Malik has a real understanding to the nature of the self, and a particular expertise dealing with problem families. Enough of those in the community, and it comes from her good heart. So, I mean, you spiritual therapists. I think Rabia is also expert on. So you see the names in therapy. How do you connect people back to the heart? How do you, which really is the key factor in bringing everything else into balance. And we can use these. We've got a wide repertoire, from changing diet to spiritual practices, if you like, that are in line with the person's fitra, as well as the concepts of understanding what's going wrong. And
Sidi, what would you say for males are some of the common themes that you've noticed? Would you say social media is one of them, and also just the idea of what a man is and his role in society? Because I think it can be difficult, to be the one who provides and provide for the family and so on. So what are some of the main causes that you've come across in males that you've dealt with, that you probably say are the root causes?
Well, people don't come to us generally saying, "Oh, I can't get off social media." I mean, we can recognise that as being in general. There was a friend of mine who did itikaf. It was a few years back, and he said to his surprise, the thing he found most difficult was not having a mobile phone with him. He hadn't realised how addicted he was to it. And for 3 days and nights, he was like coming off of cold turkey and from heroin. He was just constantly feeling it wasn't there. It took about 3 days to crack it. It's a nice example how these things creep up on you without realising it. And, your mind shouldn't be always distracted by that. You see people walk along the street, talking on the phone, and you notice how their walking is different. And actually, walking is therapeutic if you're walking the right way. You're trying to listen to the mobile phone at the same time, and you're not walking in the right way. So there's so much where people don't come to us for that. We can see it as part of the problem, but it's normally other things are more important. In there's family problems, including abuse. And yes, there is an issue about how you are a man in society. I think the average wage for a male in this country has been going down in real terms since like 1974. So whereas before, even for a working class man in this country, it was quite possible to keep wife and children on his salary and not have the wife working. Now it's very difficult. You either need support from family or you need to have a really good job. Or you live on benefits, but it's the other way. Well, this has an impact. We've got to live with it. One, we talked about the importance of fiqh and fiqh being adjusted to the circumstances people are in. It's something actually Malik particularly advocated. I absolutely agree with him. You need to give much more consideration of what I think will suffer marriages. So marriages where the contract is includes provision which is not usual. And a common one is that the wife gives up her right to maintenance for a period or maybe always. Because you shouldn't delay marriage. And if marriage has been delayed for those reasons, we need a contract that accommodates for it. And we've got to, accept this situation. It's just one of the issues that we see. It's more related to, say, for instance, people not being able to get married or feeling inadequate because they're not able to provide for a family. And at least we just see it in context and, and understand that, Sharia is flexible. It's the mercy in it. It allows for all circumstances in all people at all times. And you need scholars with good reputations, have authority that are able to understand that and, apply it to individual cases.
So, Sidi, when you talk about going away from the fitrah, I think you're actually commenting that at quite a deep level, where you're saying that that's one of the major themes,
yes,
and causes for psychological illness.
Yes, remember, we've always had psychological illness. That isn't new. Go back to the Greeks, go back to Al-Ghazali's talking about it, in Sina, Al-Balkhi. It's always been OCD. Well, Al-Balkhi is probably the first to diagnose OCD, but that may be because it wasn't actually around before Muslim civilization, or it wasn't so visible anyway, because the Greeks didn't notice it, but maybe the Greeks all dancing with Lombardo on the beach even in 500 BC and never got worried about things. But there's always been deep depression, there's always been bereavements and trauma. There's always been a condition known as mania or bipolar. There's always been anxiety around and panic. I mean, these things were described by the Greeks as well as early Muslims. We don't seem to find what's called schizophrenia until the mid-18th century, which is curious. But that's a huge topic in itself. So there always has been mental illnesses, but even those mental illnesses have got more complex. And you've got a whole range of much more layered things going on that aren't easy to pick apart. It's not just depression. Or even if it is, you can't see the causes so easily as I could 40 years ago. You had serious mental illness, we treated them. But you could see it. You could see the causes fairly easily. Now things can't. They're layered. And one of the interesting things, sometimes people get depressed, and I'm going to say this is that common, and I come across it certainly in the non-Muslim community. And again, depression is a lump term. There's all sorts of different types of depressions, and with maybe quite radically different causes. And one of those is being in a state of nafs, being in a state of repentance. It's not clinical depression. You don't want to treat that. You don't want to knock it on the head with, an antidepressant tablet or happy clappy CBT. You want to bring people through it. And this is very different from a sort of depression which is essentially biological, which you will need probably an antidepressant for. So, Islamically, we're more nuanced in how we make diagnoses. But you can get a type of nafs lawama, a state of repentance, where the person doesn't know what they're repenting for. Because at one time, everybody knew certain things were wrong. Socially, if you like, social values reflected the fitra. Now they don't. Freud is partly responsible for it, but the heart always knows. That knows what's right or wrong. So you get conditions I don't think you really would have got before. So I've come across things with non-Muslim patients where the person actually is repenting and they don't know what they're repenting for. And the therapy brings somebody back to the realization of what that is. And this is not a bad state in the way we would look upon it. It's actually a very blessed state. And you don't want to say mistake it as something that this is potentially pathological, but it does need help with. And I think you would have got that far less before, because even, in an ordinary Christian society, the values of society, everybody knew abortion was wrong. Everybody, like in this society, people knew that bragging was wrong or boasting. These sort of values have gone.
I think, just to comment on what you were saying, I think it's a reflection of the complexity of modernity and the modern world we live in, because obviously these things, they're sort of a reflection of society, aren't they?
Yes.
And I think as society has become far more complex, then illness has become far more complex as well. But yes, just to move on. No.
Well, so this work for Islamic paradigm, you should be aware of it. We've got more chance, at least understanding of diagnosing what's going on at a social level. And then when people are afflicted with the effects of these things, we're more able to see it and help put it right. Knowing that, and that's what I knows our situation. As you said earlier, that even spiritually, perhaps it's easier for us now than it was in our Ghazali's day to sort of reach the heart, because our is more generous knowing the difficulties that we face. And, we can say Islamic psychology has arisen because of social environmental forces that have, created more problems and so on. But we can also say that, yes, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has also enabled it to thrive and develop because of the need.
Yeah, and that hadith comes to mind of, if where the Prophet ﷺ says to the Sahaba, if you were to leave a tenth of your religion, you won't be saved, and there will come a people who 10% is enough for them.
Yes, absolutely.
It's definitely difficult to see. Just that.
Now, so is there anything you'd like to comment on? Or,
yeah, that's it. Just the last question now. So, just the stigma regarding mental health, really. Obviously, many people stigmatize therapy and counseling. What advice would you give to anyone listening who may benefit from Islamic psychology or even general forms or models of psychology as a form of therapy, where they're unsure, any listeners who will listen to this and they're unsure whether or not they should take a step, what would your advice be?
Well, first of all, I'm uneasy about this trope about, you know, Muslims have a particular problem with the stigma of mental illness. We don't find it. You know, our own service is, without advertising, we've got waiting lists. And I think it's sort of something partly at least put out by mainstream services that find Muslims aren't coming to them. And instead of taking a market approach and saying people aren't coming to us because they don't want to buy what's in our shop, they put it down to something wrong with it. I'm not saying it's entirely that, but I'm quite convinced that is a factor. But if you do want to approach therapy, it is risky. You know, I can see why people have reluctance to it. And when I went for my own analysis, you know, when I had Jungian analysis, I did istikhara first because I'm entrusting myself to somebody. And, you know, if that person's not of good heart or has a perverse way of understanding your psychology, you can be damaged by it, and people have been damaged. Yeah. So my recommendation is, you feel in your heart what is right for you. If necessary, you do istikhara. Is this the therapist for me, or indeed should I be going for therapy? And generally, I'd recommend somebody that's working within an Islamic psychology system, if you can find one. Not just a Muslim therapist. I mean, there can be advantages culturally in having a Muslim therapist. They're going to understand things about your culture that somebody else may have difficulty finding. But it's no guarantee if that person's been trained in unreflectively trained in a particular Western tradition, it could be just as damaging as somebody who's not a Muslim. And on the other hand, you can find non-Muslim therapists of really good heart that just have a natural therapeutic presence and understanding to them. And if you were to choose a system of therapy that's closest to an Islamic approach, it would be Jung. So we'd look up who's Jungian trained. But it doesn't necessarily that people that aren't necessarily not going to be good. So the best thing is to be cautious. I'm certainly not going to say everybody needs therapy or, you know, see you've got a problem, rush out and get it. Everybody needs the Khalil, everybody needs the good friend, everybody needs the mirror. So you find the good friend, you know, not just somebody on social media, but somebody you can sit down with. And there certainly shouldn't be a stigma about therapy, but be cautious, and I would advise praying first about it and maybe doing istikhara and even about that particular person. And if you do go for therapy and you feel it's not right, your heart is always the best judge.
So, Sidi, what would your general advice be in terms of finding the best model for you, the best person for you? Because I gather from what you're saying is, in essence, is really what works for you, but I guess the question is, how do you find that?
It's difficult at the moment. I mean, there are lists of Muslim psychotherapists, I think, but say that's no guarantee that the person's going to be working in an Islamic way. And anyway, a good therapy has to do, I think, the quality of the heart of the person, whatever they are. So I would say, first of all, if you feel you need therapy and you prayed about it and it seems to be the right answer, your heart is leading in that direction. You choose somebody and then do the istikhara about, is this the right person for me?
Yeah, and I guess it's also kind of trial and error to see if it works.
I mean, I am talking about the sort of mental illness that essentially do with psychological social factors. If you've got something serious, a really deep depression, you need to see your doctor and probably could often see a psychiatrist and get medical treatment for it. So, you know, we are talking about problems which are to do with psychodynamics rather than things which are to do mostly with biology.
See, the last final question, are you happy with where Islamic psychology is at the moment, and where do you see it going in the future? What developments do you think need to be made?
I mean, I'm happy with the way it's developing. I think what I have noticed is from being a very niche field up until about 7 years ago, to becoming suddenly popular, and the result of that is a sort of was a competitiveness in the field. Sort of published the most papers on it, and I suppose it's bound to happen. I try and stay out of it, but otherwise, yes, I'm happy at the way things are developing. I mean, it's a shame that one of the advantages the clinical centers have in America. I mean, it's partly the American market. Everybody's got medical insurance, so they can pay for therapy in almost all cases. But those that can't, they have a lot of support from the American Zakat Foundation. In this country, nobody, we've been to the organisations that nobody wants to put Zakat money into mental health. So there it is. So we have to charge. But last one knows it. So it would certainly help if there was more awareness of the problems in the community. There really are some serious mental illness problems. And as Al-Ghazali says, the Muslim community should always think about being self-sufficient. In his days, the bright boys were going to be imams and Islamic scholars, and the doctors were mostly Jews and Christians. And certainly Al-Ghazali says nothing wrong going to a Jewish or Christian doctor. But he said, in principle, we should be self-sufficient. We should have enough doctors in the community for our own needs. And this, I think, is a sound principle that, we should think in those terms of being self-sufficient. And that means we've got plenty of Muslim doctors, but we will certainly need more Muslim psychotherapists that are trained in or orientated in an Islamic direction, working from the Islamic.
Sidi, thank you very much. Inshallah, any closing words?
No,
it's a blessing to have you, alhamdulillah.
Has it been understandable and you think will be useful to your listeners?
Inshallah, I'm sure it will. The actual aim was just to, inshallah, I think being a student of the college, Cambridge Muslim College, I think generally throughout history, you get people who go out, see where the education is and where the institutes are, and they go home and, in essence, try and, either open up something or, extend that benefit to the people. So that was one of the reasons why, really, to just, alhamdulillah, introduce people to yourself and, inshallah, give us an opportunity to sit with yourself and hear your words, and also introduce people to something new, which is, or relatively new in our history, Islamic psychology, and inshallah just create more awareness about it, really. But Allah bless you, Sidi, and inshallah grant all of your services success, and inshallah ease for you all difficulties, and inshallah may this be an inspiration for more people to continue Malik Badri's legacy, yourself and all the other Dr. Rabia Malik and Shabnam and Abdullah, and many others, inshallah, and hopefully there'll be more institutes, inshallah, and it'll be more common.
Inshallah. So thank you for bringing publicity to this, Rasjid, and I hope all goes well with us. And I hope when I was talking, we're keeping, if I've said anything that has been misleading, but I hope whatever that's been said be good, will prosper and grow.
Inshallah. Take care of yourself, and inshallah, I hope to see you soon.
Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam, Sidi. Take care.